It's an Ask LOJ edition. Your great questions are in. What Jazz player is most likely to move? It's not who you think. Is Walker really tradable? Can we end tanking? Whose rebuild model is right? It's all coming up next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps, including YouTube. And now I can't find the show. Did I get rid of the show again? No, I'm right there. Okay, phew. My computer just glitched right there. All windows went down, and I thought you had disappeared. But no, we're still here. As I mentioned, the show is free and available on all podcasting apps and on YouTube. All right, today's show is Ask LOJ. It's Fridays. I love that. You guys do a great job. Super questions came in. We'll rapid fire through most of them. We're going to kind of hit trade deadline talk. Then there's some questions about Andy Larson's article about how much the players hate tanking. Can we get rid of tanking? And then there's some questions about like the various rebuild models that are at the top of the Western Conference standings right now and whether we can follow the Houston Thunder, Memphis, those kind of things, and what they did, all of which are kind of, well, two of the three are particularly small markets like ours. So that's the setup for today's show. Thank you to the everydayers that are out there that make this show what it is. You guys are the best. Couldn't do it without you. Thanks for listening every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, from final whistle to first whistle to final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers get $5. And when you bet $5, you get $300 in bonus bets if you win the first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, let's go to your questions. You guys are great. Thank you. I love this guy. You gave all the analysis, but you never said what if you made the same deal that Jazz did with Phoenix. Fair. I probably never did. So you can put me on the spot. Everyone always says you won't answer certain questions. I kind of answer everything. Having talked to Justin, so my very, very first reaction on the trade was that our pick's value is larger than the expected value of that pick. So that my very first reaction was we gave more than we got back. Okay? But then when I put it in the context of the fact that that's our third pick of 2025, our fourth pick of 2027 in all likelihood, and our third pick of 2029, then our value of those picks versus the perceived value of those, or our value of those picks compared to what Phoenix's value of those picks is not the same thing. Ours is lower. And then the perceived trade value of an unprotected pick, I had not thought of, but I haven't thought of it, and intuitively it doesn't make sense to me in that you just traded 3 picks for this one pick, so their trade value should be the same. But I kind of get the idea that the perceived trade value of an unprotected pick is bigger than 3 protected picks. And then the final piece is that it has an upside in 2031 to when the Jazz should be good, and adding talent is going to be crazy hard in this collective bargaining agreement. So in that sense, I like it. So there's your answer. So would I have made the same deal the Jazz did with Phoenix? Yeah, probably. So good question. Seeing a lot of national guys throwing Walker into trade machine deals. Is there a deal out there the Jazz would actually consider trading Walker? So let's address 2 pieces of this. Who are national guys these days? Like, if I just like get a blog or something and write it, isn't like everything national, right? Like, okay. It seems in the internet age, there's no barriers. So Two, I think Walker's being mentioned in trades because he was mentioned in trades this summer. Coming off a not very good year, seemed like a devalued piece. Teams probably hunted around. Jazz didn't make the deal. And now Walker's really good. And people still seem to think Walker's on the trade market. So two comments here. I don't know that he was on the trade market last year. I do know that last summer he was a below value player coming off a bad year or a less good year than his first year. And that people were hunting around and there was a question of whether the Jazz would be willing to move him. And so that name is it's just staying out there. I don't know that. So second thing, yeah, there's plenty. Like if Giannis becomes available, Walker's gone. Right? Like, yeah, we'll take Brook Lopez. You can have Walker in the Giannis deal. Like the idea, like, is there a deal out there where the Jazz would actually consider trading Walker? Yeah, Luka Doncic. Yeah. A lot of players. Like Walker's not a top 100 player in the NBA right now, according to the Ringer. So lots of players. But are the Jazz like on some effort to trade Walker? Is Walker not a piece of the future, so therefore they're trying to trade him? No, not at all. But I do think it's interesting, this idea that like, oh, there's not a player. No, Anthony Davis, probably trade Walker. Right? Like, yeah. So I think when you start looking at these questions, like, is Walker being traded into a trade machine? What's the deal coming back? Every single player on the Jazz, except for Lauri Markkanen, is tradable. Because Lauri Markkanen is actually not tradable by league rules. Every single player in the NBA is tradable other than Victor. I don't think there's a package you can put together for Victor. And I think if San Antonio called Denver and asked for Nikola Jokic instead for Victor, I think Denver says yes. Which makes Victor the only player in the NBA who would not be considered to be traded. Does that make sense? Who do you think is most likely to be playing for another team? John Collins, Collin Sexton, or Jordan Clarkson? I hate these because I know John Collins and I know Collin Sexton and I know Jordan Clarkson and I know they have like lives and people and they're humans and but that's the reality of where we are. So we'll still talk about it. I'm not going to be some higher mighty like, oh, we're not going to talk about it because they're humans. Yeah, no, right. This is what the money's for. Is what like that's a great line from Mad Men that Will Hardy's used before. Like, this is what the money's for. Can I take door C? Like, or you can do door D? I think Drew Eubanks is most likely to be traded. I think he's really good. Like, I watch games right now and I watch other teams' games and I'm like, oh, Drew Eubanks could really help this team. Like, I watched Denver play last night in a good win over Sacramento and I was like, oh, Drew Eubanks could really help Denver. DeAndre Jordan played 11 minutes last night. And then I watched Sacramento. I was like, oh, Drew Eubanks could really help Sacramento. Like, their backup center last night was, I don't know who played those 9 minutes that Sabonis didn't play last night. So if I actually had to take a guess here, and also his salary is the most manageable, I actually think Drew Eubanks is the most likely to be traded on the Jazz roster, if that's really what you're asking me. I think he's really good. I think, I will say, I guess I'll speak for myself. Drew Eubanks isn't like a name that you really think about a great deal and wasn't a big deal. But if you look at Drew Eubanks, he's been an NBA rotation player for 15, 18 minutes a night for 3 years in a row now. Like, he's now a bona fide top 9, 10 rotation player in the NBA, and he's good at it, right? Like, he played 16 minutes last year for Phoenix. He played 20 minutes the year before for Portland. He combined to play 18 minutes and start 31 games a year before that. And he played the final 54 games of the year at 14 minutes a night for San Antonio. Like, this is a 5-year NBA rotation big. Like, Mason Plumlee, Drew Eubanks. I don't know who's better. I think Drew Eubanks might be. So at $5 million a year, that's a pretty good deal. Like, Denver should jump on that right away. Denver's pretty limited because of what they can do. And I don't know how they can piece together the money. They would like nothing more to get off Zeke Najee's $24 million. But I think they would have to do a Dario Saric for Drew Eubanks deal. And then Dario Saric has a player option next year. So it's really the same. So they have to throw something in. I'm kind of avoiding that question because I don't really have an answer. Let me address that question in with a synopsis of what I actually think the trade market is when we come back. Or we're not going anywhere, but like in a moment, who do I think is most likely to be on another team? John Collins, Collin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson. I think the issue is actually based on the trade market, not Collin Sexton, John Collins, or Jordan Clarkson. I'll explain that as we continue here on Locked On Jazz. Friday edition of Locked On Jazz is brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Linden and in Logan. The Hyundai cars are just fabulous. We have bought 3 of them, so I am speaking from a spot of truth. And the Murdochs are 80 plus years in Utah, making sure that you have the best deal. No regrets, they like to say. So that combination gives you great security, and the Murdochs want to make sure that you have that great experience with their Hyundai cars. And whether it's the Palisade or the Santa Fe that I'm driving right now, or the Tucson or the Kona, absolutely fabulous SUV lineup. The electric cars are the Ioniq 5 and the Ioniq 6. We have the 5, killer car, blowing up sales numbers because people love it. And then the Sonata and the Elantra. If you're going to head down to either Linden, Logan, or to Murray, please email me first at dlock09@gmail.com. That's dlock09@gmail.com so that I can give you the VIP treatment, set you up with a meeting, and give you who you need to talk to over at Murdoch Hyundai. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the #1 sports book for the NFL and for Locked On. From first whistle to final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, bet $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 in bonus bets to keep the action going. FanDuel app is easy to navigate. Variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the night or the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of Locked On. Quick check of the odds for the weekend on the NFL Conference Championship games. The Commanders are a 6.5-point underdog to the Eagles, and the Chiefs are a 1.5-point favorite over the Bills. Madison Keys is the favorite for the is the underdog for the Australian Open plus 270. Utah Hockey Club is a 1.5-point underdog against Winnipeg. And tonight the Utah Jazz don't play, so 3 games to look at. The highlighted game is Memphis against New Orleans in Memphis. Might have to go to that game. And Memphis is an 11.5-point favorite in that one. Thank you very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps and the daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Go to Locked On Jazz to sign up. All right, here's my take on the trade market. I've kind of said this before. I want to say it again. My take on the trade market is there's like 15 or 16 really good players that are all available, but none of them move the Richter scale of the trade market any more than any others. John Collins, Jeremy Grant. Zach LaVine's better than everyone else. Maybe he's the one. Cameron Johnson's being talked about in Brooklyn, but he's not that great, right? You start looking across the players that are going to be available in this trade. Anthony Simons, Collin Sexton. There's not a big difference in what they're going to do for your roster, okay? Jordan Clarkson, Anthony Simons. There's just not. Like, if you're one of the top teams of the NBA and you're looking to try to find your next piece that's going to push you over the top, and you're, Milwaukee looking for one more piece, or Indiana trying to find one more thing, or maybe Detroit adding on because they're now in the top 6 amazingly in the East, or Orlando needing a little more offense. Like, it's just, unless you really are a Zach LaVine believer, which nobody has been for 2 years, there's not one guy that's sitting here that's just that much different than everyone else. So what I think is going to happen in this market is someone's going to call the Utah Jazz and say, we're interested in player X. He's really good. We'd like to have him. And the Jazz are going to say, fine, I want a first-round pick. And they're like, we're not trading a first-round pick. And the Jazz say, well, we need a first-round pick. And then that team's going to go, fine, we're not trading a first-round pick. And they're going to call the next 5 teams on the list, whether it's Washington for Kyle Kuzma, or Toronto for someone, or Charlotte for someone, or Brooklyn for someone, or the Pelicans for someone or Portland for someone and say, we're interested in that guy. And the first team that finally says, yeah, we'll just take 2 seconds, that's when the trade's going to get made. But it's such a buyer's market right now that unless somebody really has someone that fits them specifically, and in the case of like someone who has 2 years on their deal, they're like, okay, well, wait a sec, I get them for 2 playoff runs. I have a hard time seeing that we're going to see a lot of first-round picks moving. So when the question gets asked to me, John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, or Collin Sexton, the trade market to me feels very much like there's a real chance all of them could be on the roster on February 8th or whatever, 9th or whatever, 6th is the trade deadline, I think. Because they're all great guys. They've all been super teammates. They all are helping. John Collins and Lauri Markkanen's presence in that lineup the other day against Oklahoma City allowed the Jazz to have a good night and get value out of that night. If we didn't have them, that would not have been a valuable night. So they're bringing value to the franchise. And I think they're maybe bringing as much, if not more value with being high character, hardworking, good energy, good models, and playing and good players, which makes our games better and gives a better environment for the pups to learn by being on the roster than being traded for a few seconds. I think there's a discussion there. So that's my answer to that question in the way that looks. In response to Andy's recent article about tanking, Lauri commented that it sucks. How long do you think that a team can continue to tank before he and others want to leave? And it's a good question. So the Jazz are doing something interesting here with Lauri. And that is, if you look at the teams that have recently tanked, most of them have not had a player like Lauri who sticks through the process. Okay? So, like, I don't know what we think Memphis did when they won 22, 33, and 34 games and ended up with Ja Morant and then started rebuilding their franchise. But, like, none of the players that are on the roster right now are on that team. Houston had this team. None of those players are left, right? They added Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet, and they've now added Steven Adams, and they have drafted Jalen Green in the process. Oklahoma City didn't have any. They had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was young, and then he was with it, and he was there, and he kind of sat out for most of the year, and then they let him go. So when you look at teams that have done this, there have not been a lot of teams that have a lot, like the whole argument, oh, you ruin the culture, actually doesn't hold because most of the players aren't there when it's over. So Lauri, if he does in fact stay with the team through this process, is interesting and is different. We have not seen that from anyone that's coming to mind. San Antonio had a 1-year blip where they just drafted Tim Duncan and then they moved back forward. Like, I'm trying to think of teams that have done this where they've had a pretty high level player gone through a year where development is more important than wins and then had that player still with them on the backside. Like Detroit kind of done that. They added Tobias Harris. They've added players now. They drafted Cade Cunningham. They drafted Jaden Ivey. They've added Malik Beasley. Like they added Tim Hardaway. They added Malik Beasley. Like none of these players were there during this. So I don't have the answer to your question. I think it's a legitimate question. And, on at what point does Lauri be like, okay, that's enough. Now, he could also, he might decide. On the other end, once you've been through it and have a sunken cost of a few years of it, you might want to see the other side of it. Is making the draft lottery completely random, ignore the standards, the only way to get rid of deliberate tanking? Maybe. There was a system, there was a guy with the Celtics who had a system that was kind of the wheel. Mike Zarin, I think was his name. And if you go back, this is probably 2015-ish, 13, 14, proposed a wheel. And I don't remember exactly how it worked, but the idea was that you didn't do it randomly. If I remember correctly, gosh, I do not remember Mike Zarin's system, but my memory slightly is that every team would pick in one of the 30 spots all 30 years. So you would know that you were going to pick 17th when the year started. And you'd know that 4 years later, you're picking 4th. And then you'd know that 2 years later, you were picking 28th. So I think it creates every team picks in every spot over 30 years. And so, and the question on that is like, if you do that and you eliminate the draft as a mechanism by which to build your roster, what does that do to small market teams who really don't have free agency? Now, if the argument is that free agency is dead and players just sign extensions and then everyone gets traded, maybe I would love to get rid of tanking. It's bad for the game. Having any thought that a fan thinks it's better to lose than win is bad for the game. So I don't know if we redo the wheel at some point, but that was a concept that was out there by Mike Zarin, I think was his name. I feel pretty comfortable in that. And he was with the Celtics, and it didn't go anywhere. But it's an interesting one as we've made free agency more restrictive with the collective bargaining agreement and where players are all signing their extensions. And then, frankly, they're demanding to be traded to major market teams anyway. I don't know what the difference would be. And you'd just be lucky if you get the number one pick in the right year, right? So tanking right now is at least, you want to tank this year and you want to tank next year because the drafts are incredible. Next year's draft is supposed to be better than this year's draft is with the murmur from everybody. All right. We'll look at some of those free agent models. Another question about Walker's future, Cody's weight, Will Hardy's coaching, all coming up as we continue here on Locked on Jazz. Today's edition of Locked on Jazz is also brought to you by Talkspace. Talkspace.com/locked-on. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge, and that is where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient, and you can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even massage. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home, and you can even message your therapist between appointments. Clearly, I would like a massage therapist to be my therapist. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans and most insured members. There is a 0% copay for you. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. Maybe, yes. I think this is the new business. We should have massage therapists who are therapists. So you're getting a massage while you're okay, never mind. I'll stop now. Sorry, Talkspace. As a listener of this podcast, you get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA. Enter the promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA to enter promo code SPACE80 to get 80% off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code SPACE80. I'm kind of still laughing at myself. I hope you are too. I like that. That should be our new, it's a touchy-feely therapy. Never mind. That's bad. We don't want, never mind. This is getting worse. This is going down the wrong rabbit hole. All right, stop. Stop, David. Just stop. All right, let's get back to your questions. Wrap it up. It's a Friday, not enough sleep. Back on the road today, heading to Memphis. I thought these two questions were interesting. These are all kind of related, so let me just pop them all out here quickly. On the show, you said the other day, this is year 1 of the rebuild. Why isn't it really year 3 of the rebuild? That is a fair question. It just feels like we're in year 1. The last 2 years was kind of us getting here. I just feel like this is year 1. Like we're making a conscious effort to develop players over wins. Last few years, I didn't think that was totally the case till the last half of the season. This feels like year 1. And when my mindset, I'm thinking this is year 1, we got a year 2, we got a year 3, and then boom, let's go. That's my mindset right now. Which relates to, why does everyone say the Thunder were so bad for so long? It was only 2 years. So David quickly goes and looks that up and says, why, yes, that's true, because I just did their game the other day and mentioned this on the broadcast. What is interesting about the Thunder's tank, they were terrible for 2 years. They lost in the first round of the playoffs when Chris Paul made them better than they thought. And then they went 22-50 and 24-58. And by the third year, they were 40-42. What's also interesting about that is that they only really drafted well in one of those. They got Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren in the 22 draft, I believe. And that changed who they are. And they got Josh Giddey in the 2021 draft and Trey Mann, and neither of them are still on their roster. And they actually traded the pick that became Alfred Şengün. And so out of they ended up with 2 top 10 picks is all they got on all this. The whole thing with the Thunder that makes them different is they got Shea. In their trade with the Clippers, they got a top 5 player in the NBA. But they only drafted 2 top 10 guys from tanking. One is Josh Giddey. The other is Chet Holmgren. One of them is moved on, and the other may not be able to stay healthy. There's a real chance that Oklahoma City is going to do this rebuild. And we're going to look back and be like, oh, wait a sec. Your drafting didn't help. David, everyone talks about the Rockets and their accelerated rebuild, but it actually was it accelerated or just abandoned? They're a good team, but they don't have top talent. Well, the Rockets are a little different. The Rockets actually did this and did it for 3 years, right? The Rockets were just bad for a long 3 years, if I remember correctly. 17, 20, and 22 wins. Same had the last year with James Harden. And then they went 17-55, 20 and 22. And they actually are different because they're actually just still waiting on Jalen Green, who was their second pick, Jabari Smith, who was their third, and Amen Thompson, who's their fourth. And oh my gosh, is Amen Thompson great. He is a defensive beast. I never got to do a late game watch with you yesterday because of stuff. Oh my gosh. I mean, he really still can't shoot at all. He's a 19% three-point shooter, but he is altering games on a moment-by-moment basis. They did 3 years of this and then got 3 picks. The second, third, and fourth picks of the draft that were all because they're players. And now they're just, what they've done is begun to put players around those players, waiting to see if Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, or Amen Thompson is the guy. And Jalen Green shows some occasional bursts that make you think he is. And Jabari Smith has probably not done that yet. And Amen Thompson is looking like he's going to be a top 30 player in the NBA without ever being able to score. He looks great, like crazy. So that's a 3-year rebuild right there. That's kind of more of what I'm talking about when I talk about the Jazz. That's kind of what I expect us to do. And this is year 1. And then you do add the Fred VanVleet, who's 30, and the Dylan Brooks, who's 29. And then the other thing, though, their best player they got out of all of it is Alfred Şengün that they got on a trade at 16. It's just, there's no science to this. How much are the Jazz going to have to pay Walker Kessler? I think this is super interesting. I think the starting number for a starter in the NBA is going to be $30 million. And so I was like, okay, well, that's probably what Walker gets. But it's not, because Jared Allen is only making 28, 30, and 32. And Walker, in his extension, Walker's not Jared Allen yet. Like, he might, that's the hope he's going to be that, but I don't think he is that yet. The Knicks are paying Mitchell Robinson 14. Robert Williams can never stay healthy in Portland, but he's making 13. So I'm not sure. Like, the starting position in the NBA seems to me to be about 30 million. Starting centers seem to maybe be less. Daniel Gafford's getting 14 right now. Clint Capella, who Walker's probably better than right now, but on the back end of a good deal, is getting 22. So I think Walker's I'm sure Walker's group's going to come in and say he's the next Jared Allen. We want 30. And they're going to say, okay, well, that's not going to happen. And then Nikola Vucevic, who's because of his offensive game, Walker's defense is way better, is getting 21. Zubac, who I don't think Walker's better than, is getting his new deal is 18, 19, 20. I think that's the range. Which I was a little surprised. Do you think it's realistic for Cody Williams to gain the amount of weight you've mentioned? So I said he needs to gain 15 pounds in the offseason, then 8 for 2 or 3 years after that. I don't know. I saw his dad last night. His genetics are a lot closer to his brother and looking like his brother than looking like him right now. And he's just a baby. And I look at Taylor Hendricks, whose upper body, can't do anything, lower body, is mammoth right now. And I do think, I think there's, yes. And so it means I just think you have to hold back and wait and see what we find out on that. Nathan Harker wanted to know what the best breakfast spot in Memphis is. That means Nathan's coming on the trip. That makes me happy because I like Nathan. There's a cute little coffee shop in the bottom of a hotel that I'll show you about, Nathan, if you're still with the show. And otherwise, Oklahoma City to Memphis. It's really quite a tandem. Thank goodness they let us come home for a day. It is Locked on Jazz. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Ron and I will be with you after the Memphis game. They are super fast, super hard to play. Super interesting game on Saturday. Maybe I'll do a little preview thing because I'm kind of fired up for this game. Have a great one. We'll now send you the first ever. Follow me on all the Twitters and those things at DLock09. Sign up for the newsletter at lockedondaily.com. Have a great one. We send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA channel. If not, check out Locked on NBA for game night after every game, every night on Locked on NBA.